Andrea, good morning. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Let's just set the groundwork here for our viewers who might not be familiar with this process in general. Before this announcement was made, Andrea, typically, how long does it take for someone to get a green card, and what does that process look like?
It can be extremely lengthy depending on how you enter the country or what status you're in. And people should know that there are two different ways you can apply to get a green card. You can apply from abroad at a consulate, or you can do what millions of immigrants have done now for, as you mentioned, decades, which is apply to adjust your status because you are already here on a visa. You are already working. You may be married to a US citizen or have family. So they are disrupting a very established process that Congress has fully recognized as legal. And they're trying to say all of those millions of people who normally would apply from within the country now need to leave the country to do so and get their green card.
And just to get some more background context, Andrea, roughly how many people a year apply for a green card here in the U.S.?
So the numbers, always fluctuate depending on administration, but we're talking about in the hundreds of thousands, almost up to a million. And so that is a lot of people that you can imagine who already have established ties here in the United States. And just so people who may not be as familiar, we're talking mainly about people like doctors who are here working on an employment visa, like I said, spouses of US citizens. This is a real direct hit on American families who rely on the fact that our immigration system doesn't require their loved one or an employer won't lose an employee to have to leave the country for potentially years because the wait times for these green cards can go into the years, which is why Congress has said, why would we make someone just leave the country if we already know they're eligible and they're likely already going to get their green card?
The immigration debate in the United States has once again exploded into national headlines. But this time, the controversy is not centered around undocumented migrants crossing the border illegally. Instead, the focus has shifted toward immigrants who are already living legally inside the United States. People who work, study, raise families, pay taxes, and have spent years trying to follow every rule required by the American immigration system. According to a shocking announcement reportedly made by the Trump administration, most individuals applying for green cards may no longer be allowed to complete the process from inside the United States. Instead, they would be required to leave the country and return to their home nations in order to finalize their applications at U.S. consulates abroad. And immediately, fear, confusion, and outrage began spreading across immigrant communities, because for decades, the process known as adjustment of status allowed millions of immigrants already living legally in America to apply for permanent residency without leaving the country. It was a system deeply woven into the fabric of American immigration law. Doctors working in hospitals, engineers employed by major companies, international students building careers, spouses married to American citizens, refugees escaping danger. All of them relied on this process to legally transition into permanent residence. But now, according to this new announcement, that pathway could suddenly change. And as immigration experts began analyzing the details, one thing became very clear. This was not just another policy update. This could become one of the most disruptive immigration changes in recent American history. Former immigration advisor Andrea Flores appeared in an interview to explain the situation. And from the very beginning, her tone reflected serious concern. She explained that millions of immigrants have relied on adjustment of status for generations. It is not some hidden loophole or temporary workaround. Congress itself recognized the legality of this process decades ago. But now, the administration appears to be framing that very system as a loophole. And that changes everything. Imagine living in America legally for years. You have a job. You pay rent. You contribute to your community. Maybe you married an American citizen. Maybe your children were born in the United States. Maybe your employer spent years sponsoring your visa while you built a career. Then suddenly, the government tells you you must leave the country and apply from abroad. At first, some people may hear that and think, well, if someone is legal, what's the problem with going back home for paperwork? But immigration experts say the reality is far more dangerous and complicated. Because once someone leaves the United States, there is no guarantee they will be allowed back in quickly. In fact, many immigration cases take years. Not weeks, not months, years. And during that time, families can be separated indefinitely. A husband could be separated from his wife. A mother could be separated from her children. An employer could suddenly lose a highly trained worker. A university could lose a professor. A hospital could lose a doctor or nurse. Andrea Flores emphasized this repeatedly during the interview. She argued that this policy would not only affect immigrants, it would directly impact American families and the American economy itself. And perhaps the most emotional part of the discussion involved refugees and asylum seekers, because some immigrants legally, living in the United States, cannot safely return to their home countries. That is precisely why they were granted humanitarian protection in the first place. Some fled political persecution. Others escaped violence, threats, or dangerous governments. Returning home could place them in immediate danger. Yet critics fear this new policy may still force many of them to leave the United States anyway. And that is where the conversation became even more intense. The Trump administration defended the policy by arguing that it would help the immigration system function as intended. In a social media post from USCIS, officials claimed that requiring immigrants to apply from their home countries would reduce the number of people who remain illegally in the U.S. after being denied residency. But Andrea Flores strongly rejected that argument. She described it as cruel, unnecessary, and bureaucratic. According to her analysis, most people applying through adjustment of status are already highly likely to qualify for green cards. Approval rates reportedly exceed 80% in many categories. That means the government is not targeting massive fraud or dangerous individuals. Instead, critics argue this policy may create enormous suffering for people who are already following the rules. And many immigration lawyers believe the deeper goal may be something else entirely: control. Because immigration experts pointed out something extremely important during the interview. When someone applies for a green card inside the United States, they often have more legal protections. There are courts. There are appeals. And during that time, families can be separated indefinitely. A husband could be separated from his wife. A mother could be separated from her children. An employer could suddenly lose a highly trained worker. A university could lose a professor. A hospital could lose a doctor or nurse. Andrea Flores emphasized this repeatedly during the interview. She argued that this policy would not only affect immigrants, it would directly impact American families and the American economy itself. And perhaps the most emotional part of the discussion involved refugees and asylum seekers, because some immigrants legally living in the United States cannot safely return to their home countries. When someone applies for a green card inside the United States, they often have more legal protections. There are courts. There are appeals. There are procedures that can be reviewed. But when applications happen abroad through consulates, consular officers have enormous power to reject applications, and many of those decisions are extremely difficult to challenge in court. That means applicants could suddenly find themselves trapped outside the United States with very limited options. And for many families, that possibility is terrifying. As the interview continued, the conversation shifted toward lawsuits. Almost immediately after the announcement, immigration attorneys and advocacy organizations reportedly began preparing legal challenges against the policy. Experts believe the administration could face accusations of violating the Administrative Procedures Act, a federal law that governs how government agencies create and implement policies. Critics argue the announcement lacks crucial details. Who exactly qualifies for exceptions? What counts as extraordinary circumstances? Will humanitarian protections still apply? What happens to pending applications already filed inside the United States? At this stage, many of those questions remain unanswered, and uncertainty itself has become part of the fear, because thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, of immigrants are now stuck in limbo, unsure whether their futures are suddenly at risk. Andrea Flores also warned that businesses may join the legal battle. And when you think about it, that makes sense. Imagine an American company investing years into training an employee. That worker becomes essential to the organization. Then suddenly, the employee is forced to leave the country for an unknown amount of time. The company loses talent. Projects are delayed. Entire industries could feel the impact. This is why many experts say immigration is not just a political issue. It is an economic issue, a humanitarian issue, a family issue, and increasingly a legal battlefield. Throughout the interview, Andrea Flores repeatedly pushed back against one central narrative, the idea that these immigrants are somehow dangerous. She emphasized that many are professionals, workers, students, spouses, and contributors to American society. These people pose no threat, she argued. And that statement reflects a broader concern now emerging across immigrant communities, because many people believed Trump's immigration policies would focus mainly on undocumented migration or individuals accused of crimes. But this new proposal appears to target legal immigration pathways as well. And for many immigrants, that changes the emotional atmosphere completely. Now even people who followed the law may fear instability. Now even people who believed they were doing everything right may suddenly feel vulnerable. And perhaps the biggest psychological impact of all is uncertainty. Immigration lawyers are reportedly advising clients not to panic, not to make rushed decisions, and to immediately consult legal professionals before leaving the country or changing their applications. Organizations such as the American Immigration Lawyers Association are already issuing guidance and preparing for possible litigation. But until courts intervene, if they intervene at all, anxiety continues spreading. And across social media, debates are intensifying. Some Americans support stricter immigration enforcement and argue the government has the right to tighten procedures. Others believe the policy goes far beyond border security and instead attacks legal immigration itself. Meanwhile, immigrants caught in the middle are left wondering one painful question: what happens to us now? For some families, this is no longer political. It is personal. It is the fear of separation, the fear of losing years of progress, the fear of being trapped outside the country, the fear that one government policy could suddenly destroy a future they spent years building. And as lawsuits begin, as political debates intensify, and as immigration agencies prepare additional guidance, one thing is already clear: this story's far from over, because the outcome of this policy could reshape the future of legal immigration in America for years to come. And millions of people are now watching closely, wondering whether the American dream they believed in is slowly becoming harder to reach than ever before.